Well, we spoke about this with eNCA's Rofhiwa Madzena earlier on. Labour, of course, having their own expectation from the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana. Rofhiwa, morning once again, colleague. I'm going to come back to you outside Parliament. We understand you are with Cosatu's Matthew Parks.
We are.
That's right. That labour issue we've been speaking about, and government handling the wage bill over the last few years being a contentious issue when it comes to the remuneration of those who work in the public sector. Matthew Parks, thank you as usual for joining us this morning. So it's been a very contentious issue over the last few months, the wage negotiations between yourselves and government being, steadfast in its want to curb that wage bill. Where exactly are we at with those negotiations?
Sure. Well, the negotiations are still taking place. We hope government will engage in good faith, not try to cut corners, not try to impose a below inflation increase. Public servants, yes, they get paid, but they're drowning in debt like all other workers. They're supporting relatives who have lost jobs, who have lost wages. We need to give some sort of support to them. We saw with COVID-19 the value of the need to invest in a quality public service, because we depended upon our nurses and doctors, our police officers to keep us safe, our defence force personnel. There's no point in cutting corners. We saw with investments in the South African Revenue Service, in that when they appointed additional staff and invested in the machinery of the state, how it yielded benefits to the state, which is a significant increase in tax collection. So for us, it's about investing in quality public services if you want to turn the economy and the state around. We've been quite worried how government over the past 2 decades has really begun to decapacitate, to weaken the state. For example, our police service had about 208,000 personnel 20 years ago. Over the last 2 decades, it's decreased to 172,000, yet population and crime levels have risen. So we're not going to fix the state, not going to fix society's many issues if we cut corners on public service. So all public service want, like any other worker, is a living wage to be protected from inflation so they can take care of their families, and equally to help to invest in the economy.
Yeah, and one of the big things is that government just doesn't have the money, and inflation-related increases are just not possible. So what is it that you're asking for, and by how much are you willing to compromise?
So the negotiations are still meant to take place. There's always an opening, offer from the employer, from the workers, and then nobody would find each other. But to do that, the employer has to engage in good faith. They didn't do so in 2020, but we hope that their sanity will prevail, especially a year before an election. It'll be suicide for government to alienate a significant part of the workforce. But what workers are simply asking is that can they be given a salary increase to protect them from inflation? Because they really have seen the purchasing power decrease over the past few years with below inflation increases and so forth. The state has got money. It just needs to spend less money on corruption and wasteful expenditure, because we bleed billions of rands through madness by politicians and by corruption across the state. So it's a question about managing the resources properly. But also we are sympathetic to the state in terms of its limited resources at times. That's why we say let's invest more in the South African Revenue Service, because we have a tax collection rate of about 60%. If we can increase it to 65%, for example, a modest increase, that can generate an additional 100 billion rand for the state revenue. So it's about making sure everybody pays their taxes, so we can pay the nurses a living wage. We can make sure police officers can afford a house upon which to live, and so forth. But if we're going to cut corners, we're not going to achieve anything as a society.
The worry around the tax base is that we are seeing more and more people either losing their jobs or earning less, because PIT is one of the biggest contributors alongside VAT. So you've got people who are losing jobs or are earning less, but you've also got a consumer who's not spending as much because of the interest rate, which means VAT is less. How does government then navigate that environment to make sure, as you say, that we are able to get SARS to get the maximum in terms of tax revenue?
It has to do the hard choices. It has to invest in SARS. That's the easiest, quickest, fastest route to collect additional revenue. Not having to bring new tax increases per se, but just simply make sure those people pay the tax that they are required to pay. For example, on the customs front, only about 5% of our goods coming through our ports of entry are inspected for customs duty. So that denies the state the revenue it needs. It threatens local jobs and local manufacturing companies. So those are quick things we need to do. We need to make sure that we rebuild Eskom, because if Eskom can provide reliable and affordable electricity, if we can end load shedding, it enables all companies to operate, to sell the goods, to pay their workers. It means we must fix Transnet, because that's key to the mining, manufacturing and agricultural sectors, a huge part of the economy, a large part of the revenue base of the state, especially mining. If we can fix local government, that means many companies in rural areas won't have to close, like Clover did, for example, in Lichtenberg and Frankfurt. they can remain open, they can sell their goods. So it's about fixing the basics of the state. That's how you're going to grow the economy. There's no magic wand. Government has to do the hard bit, which has often failed to do so over the past 2 decades. And again, we have to remind government we have an election in 15 months. We don't have 12 or 15 months to fix South Africa. Voters will be judging over the next 6 months how far does government move on its commitments and rendering the verdict in 2024.
Thank you very much for those insights. As always, Matthew Parks, and of course we'll engage with you as you give us reaction to what is actually said in the budget speech this afternoon. Jamelo, that is my conversation with Cosatu's Matthew Parks around the wage bill, which has been a contentious issue, and obviously government coming to the table with something solid for public sector workers who are really those who provide the most essential services for us here in the country.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Rofhiwa. I mean, Sizwe Pamla of Cosatu as well, mentioning a bit earlier on in the week that for government to succeed in whatever plans, they have to work alongside, you know, those public workers, the teachers, the members of the SAPS, as you mentioned, the healthcare workers, home affairs staffing. They need their support. So those wages and those negotiations have to, of course, have the best interests of the workers at heart. But we'll wait and see what Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has to say come 2 p.m. this afternoon.